Have you ever stopped to think about why the story of one single person in trouble can completely capture the world's attention, while a crisis that affects millions barely even makes a dent? Why is it that one face, one name, has such an unbelievable power over our hearts and, well, our wallets? All right, let's get into this very human puzzle.
This quote, which we think comes from Mother Teresa, just nails the paradox we're diving into. It's this incredible insight into a really powerful quirk of human psychology, one that shapes everything from how we donate to charity all the way up to our national laws.
Remember baby Jessica? Back in 1987, the story of this one little toddler stuck in a well became this massive global event. I mean, donations just poured in, the President of the United States called. But here's the thing. At the very same time, preventative health programs that could save thousands of kids often can't get the funding they need. It's one definite tragedy versus thousands of probable ones. So why is our response so different? And this isn't just some old story, right? It's a really fundamental question about how we are all wired. Just think about it for a second. The last time a charity appeal really moved you, was it a statistic about a famine, or was it the story and the picture of a single hungry child? Well, it turns out this whole phenomenon has a name, the Identifiable Victim Effect. It's a well-documented cognitive bias, and it explains our deeply uneven empathy. And, understanding it is a big part of understanding ourselves.
So, what it really boils down to is that our empathy gets triggered by details. A specific person with a name and a face feels close and real, but a large, vague group, that feels distant and abstract, even when we know intellectually that their need is way, way greater. There's this other famous and pretty chilling quote that gets right to the heart of it. It highlights this total disconnect between our emotional ability to process one person's suffering and our intellectual ability to understand a mass tragedy. The tragedy feels real. The statistic, it just feels like a number. So what is actually happening inside our minds that causes this? Let's dig into the psychology behind this incredibly powerful bias. So what's pulling our psychological strings here? Well, researchers point to a few key things. There's the raw power of our emotions, our brain's absolute love for a good story, the way we kind of calculate our own personal impact, and this really deep-seated feeling of personal responsibility. You have to remember, our brains basically evolved to handle immediate personal stuff, not to analyze giant spreadsheets. A name, a face, a personal story of struggle, those things trigger really strong emotions like sympathy and distress, and those emotions are what push us to act. Okay, now get this, because this is where it gets really wild and kind of counterintuitive. Studies have actually shown that our compassion can decrease as the number of victims goes up. I mean, look at this. The willingness to help one child is high, right? But it drops when there are two, and it drops even more for a group of 8. It's bizarre. Yeah, they call this compassion fade or psychic numbing. It's like the scale of the problem just becomes overwhelming and our emotional system kind of shuts down to cope. We end up feeling less for the many than we do for the one. But hold on, this isn't some unbreakable law of human nature. The effect has its limits. There are actually specific situations where our bias for the one can get weaker or even just disappear completely. So let's look at the exceptions to the rule. And researchers have mapped this out for us pretty clearly. As you can see here, the effect is way stronger if the victim is a blameless child, and especially if there's a picture. But it gets a lot weaker if the victim is in a group, or if we think they might be responsible for their own problems, or, and this is a big one, if we switch on our rational, analytical brain instead of our emotional. And this idea of blame, man, that is a total game changer. For instance, a study found people were way less willing to help an identified AIDS patient if they got the virus through sexual contact versus being born with it. If we can find a way to blame the victim, our empathy can just evaporate, even for one specific person. So the crucial point here is something researchers call the singularity effect. The magic number is 1. While identifying a single child makes donations skyrocket, identifying every single child in a group of 8 doesn't give you that same boost. The real power is in the singularity. All right, and this isn't just about individual donations, This little cognitive bias has massive real-world consequences. It shapes public policy, and it can even change the course of history. I mean, you can see this playing out in the actual laws that we have. For example, the story of James Brady, who was wounded in that assassination attempt on President Reagan. That directly led to the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act. And in the same way, Ryan White's very personal, very public struggle with AIDS led to the Ryan White Care Act. One single story can literally change the law for everyone.
And get this, there's a mirror image to this whole thing. It's called the Identifiable Perpetrator Effect. Just like we're more likely to help a named victim, we are also way more likely to punish a specific, named wrongdoer more harshly than an anonymous one. The impact is everywhere. In healthcare, it makes us favor super expensive treatments for one person over cheap preventative care that could save thousands. In court, a jury's feelings about a specific defendant can absolutely sway a verdict. And in business, well, the anonymity of faceless customers can make unethical decisions feel a whole lot easier. Here is a truly, truly stark example of this. In late 2005, the U.S. Congress honored Rosa Parks, an iconic, identifiable victim of segregation, by having her lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda. In that exact same month, Congress cut $50 million from peacekeeping in Darfur, where hundreds of thousands of nameless statistical victims were being killed. We honor the one while we turn away from the many. So, after seeing how powerfully this affects all of us and our world, what does this actually mean for you? How can we use this knowledge? Honestly, the most important thing is simply awareness. Just recognizing that this bias exists is the first step toward making more conscious, more deliberate decisions. It gives you a way to understand your own emotional reactions to the news, to charity ads, to everything. And with that awareness, we can actually pause and ask ourselves about the people we don't see. We can make a real effort to think about the people behind the statistics, the ones whose needs are just as urgent, even if they don't have a camera crew following them around. And that leaves us with this final, really important question. Look, this isn't about trying to crush our natural empathy. That powerful connection we feel to the one is a beautiful and important part of being human. The real challenge is, how do we honor that empathy while also embracing our logical and moral responsibility to the many? Now, that's the balance we all have to try and find.